Well, I'm not Sebastian Jose, I'm Namrata Celine Matthew, and on his behalf, we'll be...
Yeah, hi, I'm Neeraj Jojo.
And on his behalf, we'll be presenting the project Shilpi Heritage. So Shilpi Heritage is a multi-dwelling residential building that is embedded within the historical yet contemporary fabric of Tripunithura. And for a better understanding of the project, it is very important to acknowledge the context of the project, Tripunithura. Tripunithura is a region in Ernakulam that was once the capital of the erstwhile kingdom of Cochin. The region in which our project is located was a fortified city, Kottakyagam, where only the royals and the high priest lived. In recent years, due to the development and urban expansions of Kochi, Tripunithura has merged into the city. However, the historical significance of the region still prevails along with its ancient palaces and temple structures of an architectural style which is an amalgam of Dutch colonial and Kerala architecture. There are several structures of historical value within the immediate vicinity of the project, including the Kalikatta Palace, Sri Purnathrishya Temple, and other similar structures of historical value. The annual temple festival, known as the Vrishchiga Ulsavam, takes place at the Sri Purnathrishya Temple, which is located at the north side of the site. Due to the rich culture, historical significance, and the proximity to the Sri Purnathrishya Temple, this is a region of nostalgia. None of the residents of Tripunithura wish to move out. They all have a strong desire to reside within this fortified city. And with the growing population, there is an increased demand for space within this region. In this scenario, succumbing to the market pressures, many of the old palaces are being erased to accommodate high-density residential zones that ignore the historical value of Tripunithura. This is the circumstance in which we erected the project Shilpi Heritage. When you look at this aerial view, I'd say it's almost difficult to spot Shilpi Heritage as opposed to the conventional apartment within this area. Our project almost seamlessly blends within the context. Here is a closer look at how the building sits within the site. And one of the reasons for this is the roofing system adopted from the existing roofscape of the region. Another conscious effort made to create a project that remains humble to its context is to break the mass of the structure and its perceived scale. Instead of having a tall, towering single structure, 4 narrow blocks of slightly larger floor area and consequently lower height are placed on the site. The mass is broken down to create a courtyard that is reminiscent of traditional family residences of Nalagetta style. The attics, with the disintegration of building mass, we were able to create an assemblage of hipped roofs of smaller scales. In this case, the scale of the roofs of our project matched the scale of the roofs of the other buildings within the context. And the attic spaces that are resultant of these sloping roofs function as shared utility spaces. These roofing structures also help in breaking the scale that is perceived from the courtyard. Through this, one is not intimidated by a tall structure with a monotonous facade, but is allowed to be within a more intimate space that promotes interaction among the neighbors. And the variation in facades with the double-heighted balconies, recessed and protruding balconies also help in breaking the scale perceived. The scale perceived from this courtyard is also broken down with the help of varying levels. The central courtyard is split mainly into 2 levels with a clubhouse recreational zone on the ground floor. The clubhouse spills onto this green space with a slightly raised platform at its end. And the space above the clubhouse becomes a green terrace on the first floor that is connected to the ground with these elaborate steps. There is also a staircase at the entrance that takes you directly to this podium. And within this, with this configuration, we've also been able to retain some valuable trees within the site. Through this configuration of mass and void, or building and courtyard, we've been able to create an inward-facing apartment rather than the conventional apartment that is outward-facing and cut off from the rest of the complex. With these inward-facing units, the neighborly relationships among the residents are enhanced. It promotes interaction. There has also been an attempt to maintain privacy by placing most of the bedrooms on the exterior side. It is also important to note that there are no typical floor plans within the project. The area of all the offered units vary from about 1,000 square feet to 3,000 square feet. The variation offered in these units cater to the unique needs of the residents and the buyers. This variation in design of these units also help in avoiding monotonous and repetitive facades. The project offers 2 BHK, 3 BHK, and 4 BHK apartments, and even includes duplex and penthouses.
So next, coming to the car parking. So like already adding to the points to the Namrata, technically we have used around 50% coverage, but still what we have tried to do is that to maximize the utilization of the ground floor by bringing terrace garden just above the clubhouse, and to utilize the space around the clubhouse. For that, what we have done is that to bring the car parking on the ground floor itself by giving the building on the stills rather than going considering the basement. It also helped to reduce the construction cost to an extent. Then by bringing this parking to the periphery, we gained an extra space to spill out from the clubhouse and the central courtyard. Then coming to the entry, what we have done is that we had gained inspiration from the nearby building. So the entry is mimicking an Anavadil, which we could see in the nearby structures. So also, then the arrival is also resolved such that the parking space are kept hidden from the first point of entry. This is the entry from the Anavadil. Yeah. Then on the facade, we could see an element that we inspired from Kilivadil, which is also a building element that we could see in the nearby buildings. Then we had given some viewing deck. We are named it Attachamayan deck, from where we can view the procession happening in the streets.
And coming to the more technical details, while the available FSI was 4, the FSI consumed is only 2, with a ground coverage of 53%. While we could have built approximately 8,000 square meters, our project area is only 4,750 square meters. After all, Charles Correa did once say, market forces do not make cities, they destroy them. And the reason we were able to create a project that deviates from conventional notions set by most developers is because here, the architect is also part builder. Shilpi Architects played both roles of a designer and a developer. And through this pairing of roles within the firm, we were able to compromise and draw a fine line that caters to the aesthetic and conceptual concerns of an architect while adhering to concerns of construction costs and profit margins set by a developer. And the success of the project is that now people yearn for apartments like this. In fact, we have interested buyers and are working on another project that borrow values from Shilpi heritage. I'd say this project is also an example for builders to understand that it is possible to create housing schemes that are unconventional yet profitable and successful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you have articulated the USP of the project very well, which I think in these awards cycles or frankly, a lot of architects' work is expressing the USP of what we're trying to do. I think it's a very good skill to have, because in some of our projects, we felt that what's actually important has gotten missed out in all the other details. And for us, what drew the jury to this is that we all, I think, recognize what market forces are doing to the cities and what they're doing to the practices. And I think one way to engage with them is to actually, in a way, join them and then try to sort of turn them from inside. It's slightly tricky in the sense that, like with most developers, they won't go for a 2. If there's 4
Yes,
possible,
yes.
they would go for the whole 4. So actually the real juice in something like this is, which is possibly not possible, is whether we can actually get closer to 4 but still manage the quality, because otherwise the replication of this model becomes slightly tricky, because for developers there's never enough profit. It is,
Yes,
what's the
yes.
maximum profit? Everything else is a loss after maximum profit. Having said that, again, you know, all these cycles have value in what they put across. And I think it's high time, rather than being sort of victims of the thing, we try and see how we can engage best. And it's really nice because you don't see this very often now, to see housing in a tight urban scenario with constraints and commerce built into it. Because these days the prototypes are so set that, you know, essentially you're tweaking the facade or a little bit of the master plan, the typology, like you don't really see housing anymore. And the introduction of the courtyard and the roofscape, this is also an important aspect, and it sort of came up in the flip spectrum of our categories, which was the architecture element. I think the 3C or that firm had the roofs as an element. And I think in India, we really need to have a discussion on what cohesive collective habitats feel like. In Kerala in particular, I'll highlight this because coming from north of India, except maybe Rajasthan and all the way to the east, you know, if you're going to Nagaland and Dimapur, when you're driving around, you can't tell where you are, except for the vegetation a little bit, because the habitat has become so generic, and there needs to be a pushback which has value beyond the project itself in terms of templates. So it's really nice that, you know, aspects of roofscapes and what it is to build in a heritage structure, which unfortunately, like most of our cities, has no protection. How do you sensitively intervene there? And also push back against this thing that, you know, people don't want to live in like these tight neighborhood sort of spaces, that they want to have like this endless view of some strange horizon until the next building comes up in front of them. You know, like this in a way protects them, because irrespective of what happens outside, they still have this inner life to the thing. There are some things that I felt could have been, and I think this is again one of those projects where because this is the first of its kind, yes, that once a certain muscle is built, one can develop it further. The trickiness with a lot of these elements coming in, which are trying to be homogeneous, is that they end up sometimes being pastiche. And then there is also sometimes a strange inconsistency. Like if I go back to the entrance, you know, you've looked at like some elements of traditional architecture, but actually the entrance wall and the boundary has this strange brick cladding, which has nothing, I mean, could have been very simply been laterite, which actually just easily available, yes, looks nice, yes, can really, so, and that does happen when in one project you're trying to fight a lot of fights. By the time like these things come, you know, it's almost like, I found the penthouse was also a little like, you know, like really didn't have much, yeah. And you know, you have these two, like I guess like the blocks where you have tanks on the, yes, side periphery, which suddenly feels like they've come from some other housing. It's very evident in the aerial photographs. You know, it's suddenly like there's these two blocks, yeah, just the roof as well as the facade is suddenly like from some other housing that has come and stuck itself there. So there are, in terms of, you know, like it doesn't even attempt the sensitivity that you're attempting otherwise in this scheme. So there are some things that have gotten missed out, but this, I think, fight, what the jury went for it, is that it's fighting a big fight. Yes. And I think there is value in that, and keep it up. And I feel like to also reverse what I said in the beginning, there is one thing to do where we say, okay, you know, for this model to be really successful, the FSI should try and be closer to what is demanded, like 4. Yeah. But I think the other pushback architects have to do is that our job is not just to do projects, like, you know, architecture is part of it, is also to push policy. We need to, in housing and all of it, push back against these crazy FSIs also. Yes. So just to close that first thing I started with.
I'd like to add, there's also like while we were doing something that is not available in the market, there's also a risk involved. So adding to the construction cost and to make sure that we can, so there was also that point that was involved when it came to like how much an FSI to be consumed, along with other restrictions. Yes, yes. Yes, yeah.
Thank you for a brilliant work. It's
Thank
again one of the works that we see today in the sequence since morning that can engage in a lot of discussion. Discussion because it has so many issues to throw in. I think that's typical to a project that tries to explore many facets that we as planners deal with, that they actually challenge also more conversation. I will just jump those issues that Amrita has covered from the context down to the reference, the DNA of the place, so to say, that you're trying to retain. And I was just looking at the panels outside, thinking to myself today, if you have a architectural culture, which is a reflection and manifestation of otherwise culture in Kerala, if you have an architectural culture rich and you let it go, like Delhi has lost it to a large extent, like other cities in this country and globally, then it's very difficult to do good architecture. If there's no good environment, you can't do any more good architecture. Then you become like many Chinese cities have that. You want to do iconic buildings and you want to make something very morbid and so on and so forth. So here you got already a very active culture and you have decided to retain that, retain the architectural legacy, and the heritage, which is wonderful as a strategy. I am glad that you then mentioned Charles Correa, because one of the most or the most beautiful for me housing is in Delhi, the Tara apartments. You may have visited it, I don't know, or your seniors. It's a brilliant work because it is on a similar line, devoid, of course, the heritage, similar line where you are trying to explore living in a community as and community that is established through the buildings, not a community that is through the legacy happening, a kind of coexistence of families and all, but something that is based on people migrating into that building. I'm saying that because I feel your courtyard in this building is very tight. If you see the cross section, and I'm glad that you have underbuilt, because if you overbuild this typology, it will collapse. Yeah. It will not work. Yes. Because in a housing, I think a certain distance between the apartments, a certain privacy, but also community living. We as human beings love both. You want to withdraw, but you want to be seen and you want to be a part of the community. Now, in this section, you can manage it. One can imagine it to grow nicely. So is it in Tara apartments. People have grown. Now, the biggest challenge, that's my feeling in future, could happen, and we can see that in Tara apartments, over last, I don't know, it must be now 35, 40 years old. I don't remember that, but it's very old, 40 years. People have started engaging through participation with the substance, with the material that is built, and modifying them. I don't like my penthouse, but I don't need so much of balcony. I'll push my limits. I'll build out of it. So, and that is happening in Tara apartments. People, and I think it's a very interesting model that Charles Correa has put across. And I think he envisaged it. He said to himself, probably people need, instead of 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. They need 4 bedrooms. So how do I, with a growing family or reducing family, take up in a housing the dynamics, the future of such a community? And I think you would face that as a challenge. How do you control people who live there and buy these expensive apartments? Of course, it's sold now on premium because you have to do that.
Yes.
And fortunately, because you have achieved a win-win situation.
Yeah. So most of the clients are the landlord itself, landowners itself.
Yes, so, I met them actually. That was wonderful to see his passion for architecture. So how do you retain? Because people want to push the boundaries. They will want to have more bedrooms. They would want to occupy more space. How do you control such a small community of, I don't know how many apartments there are, maybe 100 or maybe more, So how do you manage to control its architecture and the qualities that you have created now that will grow over the next period? Are there control mechanisms in place, or this is completely controlled? You buy and you can't touch anymore the facades? Because I can see already there are little indications of personalizing. One is brick cladded, the other one is painted, the other is white, the other has more metal. Maybe people love to clad it with timber in future, and so on and so forth. So one would like to, it's not a question, it's just an observation,
Yes.
what happens to these housings. Thank you so much. Wonderful work.
Thank you.